Welcome back. As promised, I'm talking now to the Resources Minister, Josh Frydenberg. He joins me live from Melbourne. Thanks very much for your company.
Nice to be with you, PVO.
Did you make a mistake shifting your support to Malcolm Turnbull, given the latest news poll?
I don't know what you mean by that. Look, it's been well discussed in the media by me and others that my vote at the party room ballot at the time last year, and I feel very privileged that Malcolm Turnbull has put me in his cabinet.
Sorry, Josh Frydenberg, my mistake. You did vote for Tony Abbott. Is your point that you were right and the Turnbull supporters look like they might be wrong now that it's shifted around to 49-51?
No, look, Malcolm Turnbull was emphatically chosen by the party room, and I think he's been doing an excellent job as Prime Minister, and I think he's driving important reforms across the economy. And when you compare his policies and his performance against Bill Shorten, I think the choice is clear. We're in favour of a more efficient, a more productive economy with a greater transition to the technologically advanced businesses that we do need with our innovation policy. Labor's in favour of increasing capital gains tax. We're in favour of a defence white paper, which is going to see more money spent on defence at a time there's insecurity in the region. Labor reduced the defence spending, Peter, as you know, to the lowest level since 1938. And I could go on. There's lots of comparisons between us and the Labor Party, which if you vote for the coalition, you'll see better government and better results.
Paul Kelly has written today in The Australian, there is a strong view in the Cabinet and party that repositioning is critical. And quoting him, it says, it means terminating the temperamental impatience and intellectual experimentation of the past 3 months. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't. I think a lot of good things have been done over the last 3 months, and I'm thinking about the government's announcement to support small business with changes to the competition reforms, even though Bill Shorten is sided with big business on changes to Section 46. As I talk about innovation and of course the Defence White Paper, the important reforms to Senate voting to give voters across the country more say in how their preferences are decided, and most recently the decision by the Prime Minister to bring back the Parliament to ensure that we pass important economic legislation with the Australian Building and Construction Commission.
But I don't mind the Parliament being brought back early. I didn't mind the Senate reform legislation either. I quite liked what he proposed on federation reform for COAG, but would he have had a better chance, or would you as a government have had a better chance of achieving these sort of outcomes if you'd gone through the white paper process for federation? It was an election commitment, Josh Frydenberg, from 2013, yet it's been dumped.
Well, I think those white papers did some good work in terms of the analysis and the preparation.
But you haven't had a white paper.
No, but there was a lot of work that was being done behind the scenes, which has helped inform our decision making, whether it's around tax or federation reform. Now, the Prime Minister, in a pretty bold move, gave the states the option of income tax. Now, they rejected it, and that proposal is now dead, but at least he's exposed the states for their failure to take responsibility to fund the programs.
But Minister, that's my point.
They are actually responsible for.
That's my point. I agree with what he was suggesting, and I'm just wondering, it was an election commitment. You said all this work has gone on behind the scenes ahead of a white paper on federation, but then we don't now have a white paper, so it's a broken election commitment. And what you talked about, a policy I agree with, fell flat with the premiers. Perhaps if all that work had actually manifest in a white paper, then it might not have fallen flat.
Oh, well, look, I'll leave that to you and other commentators to opine on, Peter. But the truth is, Malcolm Turnbull has his own authority, has his own policy priorities. There's some differences and there's some similarities with Tony Abbott before him. And, you know, in terms of federation reform, we're not going through the white paper process any longer, and I'm comfortable with that.
Was the white paper process going to happen had Tony Abbott stayed as Prime Minister? Was that your understanding?
Well, look, you know, a number of things like the tax white paper and the federation white paper would have been conducted under Tony Abbott, but I think that's irrelevant, to be honest. What we're interested in is outcomes, and Malcolm Turnbull is very focused on getting a more efficient, effective federation, and that's why he's had that meeting last week with the premiers and the chief ministers, and that's why he'll continue the good dialogue going forward.
But the reform's dead, buried and cremated now because he made it clear on Friday that the states aren't willing to be fiscal adults. I agree with that criticism. So is it really over, or could we maybe see in a second term this Federation white paper reappear and then be able to have an adult debate about possible Federation reform? Because you talk about how important it is. I agree with you. The problem, though, is that it's not actually now happening.
Well, the whole issue of a more efficient and effective federation is a very big one, and there's lots of different components, Peter, and I think that will be an ongoing debate, not just in the lead up to the election, but well beyond it. So while that particular idea that the Prime Minister put forward is no longer going ahead, I'm sure there'll be other reforms and other ideas that he'll continue to discuss in a cooperative way with the premiers. But at least now we know where they stand on those income tax related powers.
Are you as prepared to take over the Prime Ministership if the circumstances are right as Kevin Andrews, your Victorian colleague?
On to the next question. I think Kevin knows that those comments, well, he said it himself, were taken out of context, and I don't think anyone took that seriously.
Yeah, I hope not. All right, let's move on. I think when he tried to clarify that, he was on the poly pedal. You were on the poly pedal as well with the former Prime Minister. A very good cause, Carers Australia. You're not going to hear anything but praise from me for that. I looked after my mother, who received all sorts of benefits from that sort of an organisation. That said, is it appropriate that on the poly pedal the pollies take travel allowance? I mean, we've seen this entitlements review. My understanding is that they all take travel allowance. Is that really appropriate?
Well, I can only say in my case for that, the night that I came to Canberra, and I didn't take travel allowance. Now, I don't know what others are going to do, but that's for them to answer to you and to be accountable in their own way. But it is a very good cause. It is something that Tony Abbott has done over many years. I think this is the 19th year of the poly pedal. It's raised more than $4 million for charities as diverse as medical research to Indigenous health to the Flying Doctor Service and now to Carers Australia. There were a lot of people who were on that ride from different walks of life who were the carers themselves, and I have participated a number of times before, so I thought it was appropriate when I could ride on that Sunday that I did, and I'm still sore for the result.
But you understand, and I think you got mocked actually by the former Prime Minister in a radio interview he did with Alan Jones about your fitness and prowess on a bike. But we'll let that one slide. I might be taking him out of context. I thought I heard that right. But on the travel allowance thing, you've done the right thing. Make no mistake, in my view. But I just wonder what your view is on this. We've seen the whole saga involving Bronwyn Bishop. She's up for pre-selection. We've had the review of entitlements where the name's going to change. It's a delicate question because it is for charity. It's always for such a good cause. And as you point out, millions have been raised over the years. Yeah. But do you think that should just be the standard operating procedure for pollies, that they don't take travel allowance when doing good work on something like that?
Well, there's always the but-for test, isn't there? But for their role, would they be doing a particular act? And that is a helpful guide sometimes for the things that we do claim travel allowance for.
Hang on a second, Minister. Sorry to interrupt, but are you saying that there are colleagues of yours that wouldn't bother helping out a charity if it wasn't but for their role, which allows them to take their entitlement? Obviously, that doesn't apply to you. This is no criticism of you because you didn't take the entitlement, but that sounds like the but-for to me.
No, I was talking much more broadly. Look, as you know, the whole situation last year where there were allegations across both sides of the chamber of inappropriate use of members' entitlements forced a review. That review has produced a number of important recommendations as Finance Minister and Special Minister of State Matthias Cormann has been handling that issue, and you'll see a number of reforms as a result.
All right, let me ask you, before we run out of time, you're off to Perth next week with the Prime Minister, I understand. What's that all about? Is it campaigning or is it portfolio work? I feel like we're on a campaign.
Yeah, no, well, we certainly feel like that, don't we? But no, this is important portfolio work. It is for a conference called LNG 18. It's held every few years around the world. 5,000 people from overseas will be coming to Perth to discuss the LNG industry. Australia will overtake Qatar by 2020 to become the world's largest exporter of LNG, and a great beneficiary has been the state of Western Australia. And one of those projects is the Gorgon project, the largest single private sector investment in this country ever, at some $70 billion. So we'll be talking about access to markets, about how innovation is changing the industry for the better, and how Australia is at the cutting edge of those innovative practices.
Just a quick final one. In your portfolio, it's interesting because a lot of the rhetoric is about needing to transition from a resource-dependent economy because of the mining boom having come off. How do you feel about that? Because obviously your role, part of your role, is to spruik the enormous value and benefits attached to the resource sector. Is that a slight difficulty in the sort of context of where we're at with this transition that's being talked about by others?
No, I don't think so, because the resources and energy sector is still vitally important to Australia. At around 10% of GDP, more than 300,000 people are employed in those sectors. But at the same time, that record level of investment that was on the back of the high prices we saw for iron ore, for coal and for oil and gas has definitely slowed. So we saw, Peter, $400 billion worth of investment in capital production in Australia between 2003 and 2014. Now that has slowed as a result of the falling prices. So the economy does need to focus on other areas if we're going to create those jobs that were previously created in these resource projects. So I'm very comfortable with the talk about a transitioning economy. At the same time, we must emphasise that when we're talking about innovation and new technology, it's not just in new startup industries or communications-based industries, it's also in established industries like resources and energy. For example, the Gorgon plant, it's the largest subsea infrastructure ever built anywhere in the world. We've got autonomous vehicles being used underwater at Woodside's Pluto facility. You've got companies like Fortescue and BHP and Rio Tinto operating trucks and drilling equipment and trains 1,500 kilometres away in the Pilbara from their operations centre in Perth, all done remotely. This level of automation is world leading, and it's being done in Australia by Australians.
It's a good point. Innovation is well and truly there in the mining sector, the resource sector more broadly as well. Josh Frydenberg, Resources Minister, always appreciate you finding the time to talk to us here on Newsday. Thanks once again.
Nice to be with you, Peter.
All right, coming up after the break here on the program, we'll have James Bracey. He'll return for more